is how the Buddha actually tried to develop his mind. And as I developed his mind, it's obviously the state before he reached awakening. And what he actually did was not trying to immediately go to his breath or anything. It's basically, he said, I divided my mind in two parts. And on one side of the mind, I put thoughts of sensual desire, thoughts of ill will, and thoughts of cruelty. And on the other side, I put thoughts of renunciation, thoughts of non-ill will or loving kindness, and thoughts of non-cruelty. Because that's what the Buddha did, and it's not what one should practice as a lay practitioner. We're going to modify the whole business a little bit. And so I start with the two later ones, which is ill will. So what is thoughts of ill will? What is it? Ill will is thoughts directed against a person or an object, something we're not happy about, we're getting negative about. The proliferation of negative thoughts full of ill will. And then he distinguished the thoughts of cruelty. And cruelty, I couldn't do much with that translation for a long time actually, because I couldn't quite distinguish what is the difference between ill will and cruelty. Or is cruelty not just a bit of an extreme form of ill will? And it puzzled me for a while until I read a German translation for that. And the German translation was Rücksichtslosigkeit. And Rücksichtslosigkeit, the closest I can get from a dictionary, is ruthlessness or inconsiderate, being inconsiderate. And there's a clear distinction there if we contemplate about that. Because being inconsiderate doesn't necessarily mean that we have anything against somebody else. Being inconsiderate basically means we have our own agendas and we're willing to push our way through, to use our elbows actually. We don't take the feelings of other people into consideration. So, basically whenever these thoughts of ill will and cruelty arose in the Buddha's mind, he contemplated like that. This is not for my own benefit, these thoughts. They are not for other people's benefit, these thoughts. They are neither for my benefits nor for other people's benefit, these thoughts. They obstruct wisdom. They don't lead to Nibbana. And he said, with this sort of thinking, usually the negative thoughts diminished already, or completely evaporated. And on the other side, he put all the sorts of renunciation, what we as, or you as lay practitioners, could use everything which goes beyond the 5 precepts, all sorts of sensual desire, which doesn't take other people's needs and concerns into consideration anymore. And that would be directed to other people. That would be the, if there comes thoughts of loving kindness, goodwill, then the Buddha thought, this is to my own benefit, this is to other people's benefit, this is to my own and other people's benefit. So basically they couldn't perceive any harm in this sort of thoughts. And he practiced that for a long time, before actually says, and after some time I realized that the mind with excessive thinking is still going to get tired. The body is tiring. And when the body gets tired again, then negative mind states arise again in the mind. And so then, after he said he contemplated, he could contemplate sorts of goodwill and non-cruelty for a day and a night. And I mean, that's pretty impressive. I have to imagine actually he was sitting for very long periods, and that any negative thoughts were arising in his mind anymore. And so then he focused with that sort of really wholesome mind. He focused on concentrating the mind and stilling the thought process. And then basically he goes through all his enlightenment experience and so forth. So that is a meditation the Buddha did. I mean, we all experience that quite often, I guess, that we try to sit down. And it's very hard to stop that thought process. And it's just a different method to train the mind in that way that we see not only in our sitting meditation, but also in our day-to-day life, because we think the whole time. I mean, what one tries to aim for as a practitioner is to take that practice a step further, take that in the day-to-day life, because that's gonna bring about the bigger changes in our lives if we're watchful what's going on in that mind. And if we train that in our meditation for a while, then we also find that when these thoughts come up, thoughts of ill will or thoughts of inconsiderate thoughts, that we are much more aware of that, much faster aware of that. And the more thoroughly we have contemplated before, what sort of negative effects does that have on me, this sort of thoughts, the more powerful is also the influence, because what the Buddha realized even before his awakening was, he says, whatever the mind thinks and ponders upon, frequently, in this direction the mind will incline. That's a very important sentence, actually. I mean, this is sort of the key how right thoughts works and how right thoughts form into a wholesome character, because we become that what we think. Whatever we allow in our mind to persist and to proliferate about, in that direction our mind will develop, and in that direction we will perceive our surroundings. So if we think a lot of ill will thoughts, and I mean, it happened to me in the monastery with one person, I can now very clearly see when that situation with that person really deteriorated in the monastery was when I lost my goodwill, when I really didn't make that cut anymore, when really negative thoughts arose about that person. And then instead of seeing my own defilements in the mind, basically that person just becomes an idiot, an unbearable idiot I cannot live with or whatnot. And then it's very painful, because usually in the monastery, or at least sometimes in the monastery, you're in a more wholesome state. And so it becomes really almost physically painful when you see that you cannot live at ease with that person even in one room anymore. And so it's very hard sometimes to see, well, okay, that is not to the other person's benefit actually, but if one has negativity already, basically what one thinks is, I don't give a damn, you know. I mean, not thinking about the other person's benefit. I mean, if there's anger and ill will already towards that person, I couldn't care less. This is basically that the only thing which can help or did help me, and then I'm hurting myself with it. I'm creating mind states here where I have to suffer with. And it's usually then very powerful to it draws the mind back from this sort of thinking, just seeing the danger in it. And that's also one thing the Buddha encouraged people to do, just very soberly reflect actually on every situation, every thought, the gratification, the danger and the escape. And seeing the gratification of thoughts of ill will might, I feel righteous in that moment and feel sort of alright. But the danger is basically very obvious after a while, that life becomes very hard, the mind becomes very hard, and your meditation is going bad. And you take that stuff into your hut. And it's just very, it's awful actually. So if the mind is a bit more peaceful before, then one just can immediately distinguish that it's not a wholesome mind state to go in. So then the next thing is that the Buddha gave some advice what to do when negative thoughts have arisen in the mind already. And instead of sorts of sensual desires, or for you, sorts of breaking your precepts, thinking positive about something which goes beyond the 5 precepts, he just says greed, hatred and delusion. And greed and hatred basically it's very close to sensual desire as well, basically. And the delusional part is basically then forgetting completely in that what is wholesome and what is unwholesome. And the first thing he advises people to do, and that is what I did that meditation with you tonight, is we find unwholesome thought arising in the mind already. What do? We try to bring the thought process towards a wholesome object. But if we haven't trained that before, if we don't have any refuge sort of a beautiful thing like gratitude or loving kindness or whatever it is where the mind likes to turn to, then it will be very hard to have that object present when we need it. And so it's a form of training to really develop this positive, soft mind, whatever that might be for you. And the second point is that I want to add actually that with the first way to turn the mind away from negative thoughts is one way which is, it's not mentioned randomly as the first one, because this is the one which changes our character and our tendencies, our desire in a positive direction, which basically changes things. Because, like I said before, what the mind thinks and ponders upon, in that direction the mind will incline. So if we think these thoughts of gratitude, of loving kindness, of harmlessness or guilelessness, or whatever wholesome states come to mind, if we develop that consciously in our meditation as well, instead of just going to the breath, then the mind will incline more and more towards that direction. And it takes some time, and I mean, in the world we also have then a lot of negative influences. We just have to counter in the news, television, whatever. There's a lot of negativity, there are a lot of catastrophes, things like that. So we hardly ever do that we consciously develop some good states in the mind. And it's a very important thing to do. It's basically part of right effort. And this is what is changing our tendencies, our negative tendencies, towards turning them into better tendencies, wholesome tendencies. And the second point is, if we cannot do that in that moment, negative thoughts arise, then we contemplate the danger of these negative thoughts. We just have to make that very clear, what sort of consequences are these thoughts are going to have. And if you watch that for a while, then you see that just this guy in Austria comes to mind, who locked up his own daughter for 24 years and fathered 7 children with her or whatnot. I just heard he built that bunker underneath it. It took him years to complete that thing. Can you imagine how much thought he put into that project actually, to fulfill that end, that he can lock up his own daughter down in that cellar, just for sexual desire and control, or whatever it was actually, what he was getting high on. So it's amazing actually. It's not just actually that things, people are born like that in doing this awful stuff. It's just basically he gave that a lot of thought and consideration, definitely. And that's clearly where we can see the danger actually. I don't want to be in his shoes, in this guy's shoes now actually, definitely not. And so I guess with a bit of awareness we can also find then the danger in thoughts of ill will towards the people you work with or the people you have to deal with day by day, and really spin that out. Where's that leading to? Can that ever be to my own benefit? Can that ever be to that person's benefit? So it's beautiful to have that awareness and to be able to cut this thought process before it really goes into something which we cannot stop anymore. And the third one is an interesting one, because Buddha basically said, just distract yourself. If the unwholesome thoughts through some occasion become really sort of unmanageable, and you see that you're in this dark mind space, everything you're seeing from now on, if you have a bit of mindfulness, you will see is going to be exactly colored in that darkness of the mind you have there already. So instead of trying to figure anything out in that moment, you really distract yourself with something. And it doesn't even need to be anything particularly wholesome. I mean, you have your television or whatnot, or pick up a magazine. I mean, it's nice if you find something which is inspiring to you, puts you in that positive mind state, but that would be the first point again. But if something has a certain intensity to it, it's just that sometimes distract yourself, distract the mind, change the object of your thoughts completely. So it's probably what people, if they have some awareness, actually what they usually do. I guess the only trouble is in that most of the time people like to distract themselves all the time then actually. And the fourth one is one for the more quiet moments, because it's not one we can practice when there's too much unwholesome thoughts going on already. At least I cannot do it. That's following the whole thought process back to the very beginning. So basically we make this stop. Where did this whole thing start, or where did this whole thing start here? So you go follow we need a really good amount of mindfulness to do that. See where we're at and go back. How does this whole unwholesome thought process arise? And sometimes it can be a smell, can be a sight, can be a sound, and just the proliferation of the mind around that creates an incredible string of unwholesome thoughts. So it's at least an interesting exercise actually to see that this proliferation process of the mind. I have to admit I don't practice this very much. And then the fifth one is the immediate action course. That's when you're about to do something really unwholesome, by either speech or even action, violence, whatever. That's before the body goes into action with abuse or violence. That's when the Buddha said, you clench your teeth together and press the tongue against the roof of your mouth and fight mind with mind. Just not to let that out. Because how often does it happen that we, in a moment of anger, say something or do something which is so hard to take back later and to that we have to regret then. I mean, it happens actually that, I mean, in the monastery it happens to me still all the time. I cannot shut my mouth or whatnot and stuff comes out. I mean, it's so important to see that this is a real training of the mind. This is not something I have to be perfect in, or it just works from the very beginning, but just to keep that in mind, that my future is determined actually by this thought process, by this constant thinking, what we do from the first moment when we wake up to the last moment when we go to bed. It's just thinking. So beautiful to have that awareness, what are we thinking? And to have these categories, and just not even being judgmental about yourself, because it has to be good for yourself as well. And the more positiveness one can put into that thought process, that's just how the lighter and more delightful one's own mind is going to be. And it obviously, I mean, for the people who practice a while, and for me myself, you see, this is not a process which goes overnight. It just takes years and years and years, and I don't know how far I'm going to get this lifetime, but that's basically what I can do in that lifetime. And it's beautiful that I have this opportunity to do that, or even know that concept, the relationship between the thoughts and the perception. And I mean, that's a major key in Buddhism, where the right view and right thoughts come just into place, hopefully for us, to make the other factors of the Eightfold Paths working. Because if these two factors work, right view and right thought, then I mean, right speech and right action, right livelihood is just comes naturally into place. But what we definitely need is this effort to first to distinguish wholesome from unwholesome thoughts, and then consciously develop wholesome thoughts, and consciously diminish unwholesome thoughts. That's the right effort. And I mean, you also see very clearly then that you need mindfulness for that. And mindfulness always will have these two aspects, that we are aware what's going on right now in our minds. And the second is to remember how we're supposed to deal with that mind, to bring positive results for ourselves and for other people. So I'll tell a little story now, maybe because I was afraid that it's going to happen, that I'm getting very theoretical tonight and people cannot quite follow me. So I tell you a story now and try to put these factors into that story that makes it a bit more obvious what I'm trying to talk about. And that story is about a Christian minister who's at the airport, and that minister just comes from a religious conference, and that conference was about love and forgiveness. And he's very inspired. There were great teachers, and he had great talks and had beautiful conversations with his associates. And even his flight was delayed, and everybody seemed to travel on that night. He was in the airport. The airport was just jam-packed. Just his feeling of goodwill and the inspiration he had from that talk couldn't be diminished so far. And so he was a bit hungry, and so he's going to treat himself, and goes into one of these little airport restaurants. And in that restaurant he has a huge queue, and he has to wait ages, and has his baggage in his hand, actually hand luggage and his real luggage, and is waiting in the queue and still patient. And then at the end he gets his coffee and his bag of donuts. And then he sits down at one of these small airport tables, small round tables actually. Basically there's another guy sitting there already reading a book, and he asks him actually, he said, "Is he taken?" And no, "Go ahead please, thank you." So puts his newspaper, coffee, donuts on the table, sits down, gets his jacket off, and just like, first time he can sit for quite a while. And we realizes actually it's that table with that sort of amount of space around me is just impossible to read the newspaper now. Just put the newspaper away. He's just happy with his donuts and his coffee, and takes a first bite of his donut, and quite tasty for an airport donut actually as well. And looks around, and then the other guy opposite him just grabs his bag of donuts, takes the donuts out and starts chewing. Right. Did that guy just take one of my donuts? Doesn't look poor to me or anything, you know. Maybe a foreigner doesn't have any exchange or what? I could at least have asked me, you know. Okay, never mind, you know. Takes a second donut and starts chewing. And then, swoops, the other guy grabs a bag of donut again and takes out another donut. And he's just like, what is that, hidden camera or something like that? He did it again. And now a bit of anger is coming up in him. Just like, what is wrong with that guy, you know? And he takes a bag of donut and definitely puts it very close to his own position now. And then the guy starts to put our minister, the person puts his book away and gets up, and the minister is just like, thanks God, this guy's leaving, you know, and looks in the other direction. And that guy grabs the bag of donut, takes out his last donut, breaks it in two, puts half of the donut on the table, looks at him, grins, inclines his head in a gesture of goodbye, and is off. And the minister, I mean, if he was a cartoon figure or something like that, you would probably see all these red lines in the eyes coming up actually, and then there's smoke coming out of his ear, and somewhere's a steam pipe in the background actually. It's just like, he touched it. He touched my last donut. And then, I mean, he's using a few swear words, and we leave that out now actually. And then this thought process starts, and just like it happens when we get really angry, it's just like this. I mean, this is all nonsense, you know, this loving kindness and forgiveness and whatnot. Look at that. I'm giving that guy just an opportunity, this bully, to walk all over me. Yeah? What sort of messages am I sending out here for this sort of guys? Yeah? It's okay, just take him. I mean, this is sort of this loving kindness business is a sort for something for a realm where everybody is perfect and keeps the 10 Commandments, because he was a Christian priest actually. And so he's really upset and disappointed, and in that moment is where he really gets negative and thinks that I just should take that half donut and shove it right up his. And then, no, stop. Okay, it's enough now actually. So he just grabs the newspaper and distracts himself. So if we examine that situation a little bit, sure we can say why did he not ask that guy actually, hey, are you hungry? You want some of my donuts? I'm willing to share with you, but you can ask or whatnot. Sure. But he didn't seem to have the mindfulness, or maybe he just waited too long, for he was too angry already. And I mean, if he was a perfect saint, he could have basically not even mentioned it or whatnot, and just, here, I have that bag of donut, I'm going to get myself a new one. But also, it's an airport, that guy doesn't look poor, and just takes his donuts. So it's a sort of, I mean, if we're not total hypocrites, I would say most of us wouldn't have reacted much better than that minister, and probably some of us would have reacted worse than he did. And I mean, in the end, he even did the right thing by when he was really getting into negative thoughts, that he took the newspaper and just trying to distract himself. That's what we talked about before. And when nothing goes anymore, first he clenched his teeth together, that he didn't swear at that minister, and fought mind with mind. And then in the end, actually, when the thought process just was rolling on and on in a negative direction, and doubting everything that he had believed in before, because we shouldn't forget that there was a really mixture of emotions in that minister as well. He was so inspired before, and everybody of us knows that, who was a bit inspired once, how disappointing that can be when we found us back in that reality where we see our own limitations in the situation. Just getting angry, something so banal as a few donuts, actually. So there was anger, and there was disappointment with himself, sadness that the whole thing doesn't seem to work out as well. Well, and I guess the story could end here, actually. Well, sometimes we're lucky and life is teaching us something beautiful. So what actually happened is that when he opened that newspaper, there was this soft thud on the table. Book. And he looked down, and what was there? Bag of donuts. His bag of donuts. And so, from one moment to the other, instead of being the victim, he was the perpetrator of that whole situation. And then there was the review in his own mind as well. Just with how much rudeness he had paid that person, actually, from the very beginning, who didn't even mention about that he was eating the other guy's donuts the whole time. And then he recalled, and just like, man, and then he got up and he broke his last donut and shared it with me. And then what annoyed him first the most was that this smile the guy gave him didn't fit with the situation. He thought there was sort of a sneer, and that guy was trying to push his button and making fun of him. But because the smile didn't really look like that, he was confused and just getting more angry. And because in the end, after getting perspective, he found it was a friendly smile that man gave him. Just didn't seem to fit the situation at all. And so then he got up and looked around and really wanted to buy that guy 10 bags of donut and apologize 100 times, but it was long gone, actually, in the crowd. And so it's very, very important that we get our facts right before we blurt out something sometimes. And it was a beautiful lesson for him, and it also restored a lot of his faith that really some good people out there trying to do their best, and some people who are probably much more developed than we are already just have developed a good heart. Don't mind anymore if somebody eats your donuts, or it's not worse for them breaking up a fight. So it's one of the things one can do to avoid these situations is to get that very, very clear in one's mind that to check out the facts. If before starting a confrontation with somebody else, always make very, very sure you have the facts right. Otherwise it could be really embarrassing. Just imagine you would have shouted at that guy, actually, or even thrown half the donut at the back of his head or whatnot, He would have looked like a complete idiot, So, there was really a good effort of him that he could just clench his teeth together, and often it's good to have that wisdom to make sure the facts are right. And then other advice is also that you check that your mind state is right, even to say something to that person, because if we come from a angry position, it's not going to be a good outcome, even if we are right. If the mind is angry already, the other person just cannot take that advice or that admonishment, whatever. It's just impossible to take it if somebody comes from a position of anger. And the third one is always to look if that other person is now in the position to receive any sort of admonishment. Is he distressed right now? Is the other person angry already? Well, it's definitely not the right time to say anything. So I'm going through the 5 points just once more. If you forget them again, and if you're interested in that, as in Sutta number 20 of the Middle Length Discourses, removal of distracting thoughts. 20, Majjhima Nikaya, Middle Length Discourses, the Buddha. It's getting in a bit more details. And the point is to, because what the Buddha always does is just he gives general advice. He's just pointing towards something, but to make that thing alive, that really depends on ourselves. How well we can do that. How much interest we even have to do that. So the first point was that we try to to change our negative perception into a positive perception. And that for that we need to have established positive refuge, how you call it? Positive refuge for the mind already. So we take the mind away from the negative thought process and put it on a wholesome object. And the next one to remove this distracting and negative thoughts is to see the danger in this thought process. And that just depends on one's own imagination, how clearly we can see this danger, really. Because if we see the danger, we're just not going to do it. It's just the nature of the mind. We don't put our hand in a flame because we know it's going to hurt. If one knows that one's mind that well, that sort of thought process is leading me exactly to some sort of pain in the future, which is probably comparable to that pain of sticking your hand in the fire, and the mind is not going to go there. So the more clear that becomes in the mind, the less the mind will be inclined to go in that direction. Well, and the third one is to really, if one is in this, if anger has come up to a certain degree already, then is usually the best refuge to distract oneself, to just avoid that situation, get out of there, get out of that thought process. Just let it be. This is not the right time to think about anything. My mind is clouded with anger right now. And we need to be aware of more positive mind states and not forget the positive mind states, because otherwise we can completely forget that we're in a negative mindset. That happens to me in the monastery as well. It's just when you're on retreat, sometimes you can get in a sort of a groove or whatever. It's just your contemplation was not skillful enough, and I mean you don't have little distractions, you spend 2 weeks by yourself, and before you even realize what's going on, the mind is in that constant negative thought pattern the whole time. And what I usually do then is, if I get a bit of mindfulness up and see actually, oh, what's going on here? It's just saying, I try to recall the most happy moment in my life. Some moment actually where I definitely knew that was a happy moment. And if that happy moment, recollected in that moment, feels shitty, and I know, oh, you're in a really shitty mind state, man. You're in a bloody awful mind state. And it's very important to realize that, because I mean everything is going to be colored in that mind state. Every thought is going to be in that direction. And then it's even for a monk, it's good to get out a book, a comic book or what. Distract yourself, take your mind off that. It's not worth contemplating in that state, because it's just not going to leading anywhere also. Well, and the fourth one is a good exercise in just making oneself aware how that proliferation process of the mind is triggered. And that sometimes little occasions and small thoughts can have this incredible outcome. They start from almost nothing, and they develop into this huge picture. But it's a difficult one, in my opinion, a very difficult one. And that's definitely not one uses when one is angry already. That's already one to when slight negativity arises in the mind or whatnot. Yeah, and the fifth one is the one that people use the most. This Buddhists and trying to keep the 5 precepts or what. There's a lot of teeth gnashing and pressing the tongue against the roof of your mouth to avoid stuff. But that stuff is just closing the steam of your pressure cooker. That's all that does. That the steam doesn't come out and burn somebody or yourself. It's not going to reduce the heat on the pressure cooker. That action of restraint is not really reducing the negative tendencies, it's really just holding them in. The only thing which reduces these negative tendencies is seeing very clearly for oneself which consequences they have. Being interested in building up that awareness of the consequences of one's thought. Well, that's pretty much all I have to say tonight. I think it's good enough. Thank you very much.